The highway lights blurred past the window like falling stars, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I could notice something so small when my chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible hand. My husband's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw set in that way I'd seen 1,000 times before when he was angry about work or money or something one of the kids had done. But this time felt different. This time, when I reached for my phone to call my sister, he took it from my trembling fingers, silenced it with one swift motion, and said 5 words that made my blood turn cold. "No one is coming for you. I made sure of that." In that moment, with my heart racing and my breath coming in shallow gasps, I realized that the emergency I was facing wasn't just medical. It was something far worse. Something that had been building for years in the quiet spaces of our marriage, in the silences over dinner, and the way he'd started looking at me like I was an obstacle instead of a partner. My name is Rosa Delgado, and I'm 53 years old. For 31 years, I've been married to Victor Delgado, a man I met when I was barely out of college, working as a receptionist at a law firm where he was a junior associate. He had ambition back then, a fire in his eyes that made me believe we could build something beautiful together. And we did, or at least I thought we did. We raised 3 children in a modest but comfortable home in the suburbs. I worked part-time as a teacher's aide for years, then full-time once the youngest started high school, contributing what I could while Victor climbed the ladder at his firm. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We took 1 vacation a year, usually to visit my family in New Mexico. We had Sunday dinners together. We celebrated birthdays and anniversaries with cake from the bakery down the street and small, thoughtful gifts. I remember our wedding day like it was yesterday, even though it was over 3 decades ago. We got married in a small church in my hometown, with my grandmother's lace mantilla draped over my hair and my mother crying happy tears in the front pew. Victor looked so handsome in his rented tuxedo, and when he said his vows, his voice cracked with emotion. "I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you for all the days of my life," he said, holding both my hands in his. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. We honeymooned in a cabin in the mountains. Nothing fancy, just 4 days of hiking and talking and making love and planning our future. We talked about the house we'd buy, the children we'd have, the life we'd build together. Victor wanted 3 kids, maybe 4. I wanted a garden and a dog and Sunday mornings reading the newspaper in bed. We were young and hopeful and convinced that love was enough to carry us through anything. The early years were good, genuinely good. We lived in a tiny apartment with secondhand furniture and dishes from thrift stores, but we were happy. Victor worked long hours, but he always came home excited to see me, kissing me in the doorway and asking about my day. We cooked dinner together, simple meals like spaghetti or chicken and rice, and we'd eat on the couch watching rented movies. When I got pregnant with Maria, our first, Victor was over the moon. He painted the nursery himself a soft yellow because we wanted to be surprised about the gender. He read parenting books and asked his own father for advice and promised me he'd be present for every moment, every milestone. And he was, at least in those early years. He was there when Maria was born, cutting the umbilical cord with shaking hands and crying harder than I'd ever seen him cry. He was there for her first steps, her first words, her first day of kindergarten. But somewhere between Maria and Carlos, something started to shift. Victor's firm promoted him to senior associate, which meant more responsibility, more hours, more pressure. He started coming home later, sometimes after the kids were already in bed. He'd pour himself a drink and sit in his home office with the door closed, working on briefs and case files until well past midnight. I tried to be understanding. I knew he was working hard for our family to give us the life we deserved, but I missed him. I missed the man who used to dance with me in the kitchen while dinner cooked, who used to ask me about my dreams and my fears and my opinions. The man who came home now was tired and distracted and short-tempered. When I asked him to help with bedtime or to spend a Saturday at the park with the kids, he'd snap at me. "I'm working, Rosa. Someone has to pay the bills around here." It stung, that comment, because I was working too. Maybe I wasn't making as much money as he was, but I was contributing. I was managing the household, raising the children, keeping everything running smoothly so he could focus on his career. But he didn't see it that way. To him, my work wasn't real work because it didn't come with a big paycheck or a title or recognition from the outside world. I tried to talk to him about it once, sitting at the kitchen table after the kids were asleep. "I feel like we're drifting apart," I said softly, reaching for his hand. He pulled away. "That's because you're too needy," he said flatly. "I can't be everything to you, Rosa. I have a career. I have responsibilities." And that was the end of the conversation. He walked away, and I sat there alone, wondering when I'd become the problem in my own marriage. When Sophia was born, our third and final child, I thought maybe it would bring us closer together again. I thought the joy of a new baby would remind Victor of what mattered, of the family we'd built together. And for a little while, it did. He took a week off work, something he'd never done before, and he helped me with late-night feedings and diaper changes and soothing Sophia when she cried. But as soon as that week was over, he was gone again. Back to the office, back to the long hours and the stress and the distance. I felt like a single parent, even though I was married. I was the one getting up in the night, making breakfast, packing lunches, driving to school and soccer practice and music lessons. I was the one sitting in the pediatrician's office when someone had a fever or an ear infection. I was the one helping with homework and school projects and teenage heartbreak. Victor was just a ghost who occasionally passed through our lives, leaving behind criticism and complaints, but rarely offering help or support. The money started becoming an issue around the time Maria went to college. We'd saved for years, putting aside what we could in a college fund, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. Victor made decent money, but he also spent a lot on things I didn't always understand. Expensive dinners with clients, a new car every few years, membership at a country club he claimed was necessary for networking. When I suggested we cut back on some of those expenses to help with Maria's tuition, he looked at me like I was insane. "You don't understand how the professional world works," he said condescendingly. "I need to maintain a certain image. If I show up to business dinners in an old car and cheap suits, people won't take me seriously." I wanted to argue that our daughter's education was more important than his image, but I'd learned by then that arguing with Victor was pointless. He always found a way to make me feel small and stupid, like my concerns were trivial and my opinions didn't matter. Around this time, Victor suggested we restructure our finances. He said it would be more tax efficient if he managed everything through accounts in his name, that it would protect our assets in case anything happened. I should have questioned it. I should have demanded to see documents and talk to a financial advisor and understand exactly what was happening. But I trusted him. I trusted that he had our best interests at heart, that he was looking out for our family. So I signed the papers he put in front of me without reading them carefully, without understanding that I was signing away my access to our savings, our investments, our security. Within 6 months, my name was removed from almost everything. The house was in his name. The bank accounts were in his name. The credit cards I'd been using were suddenly canceled, and when I asked why, Victor told me he was simplifying things, and that I should just ask him when I needed money. It felt humiliating, having to ask my own husband for money to buy groceries or clothes for the kids or gas for my car. He started questioning every purchase, every expense, making me justify why I needed $20 here or $50 there. "What did you do with the money I gave you last week?" he'd ask, his tone accusatory. "You're spending too much, Rosa. We need to be more careful." But he wasn't careful with his own spending. He still went out for expensive dinners, still bought himself new suits and watches and electronics. The rules, it seemed, only applied to me. I felt trapped, dependent, like a child asking for an allowance instead of a partner in a marriage. My self-esteem, which had never been particularly high, shrank even further. I started to believe what Victor implied with his words and actions, that I wasn't capable, that I wasn't smart enough to handle money, that I needed him to take care of me because I couldn't take care of myself. My sister Elena saw what was happening before I did. She'd always been protective of me, the older sister who looked out for the younger one, and she didn't like Victor. She'd never said it outright, but I could tell from the way she watched him at family gatherings, the way her jaw tightened when he spoke to me in that dismissive tone he'd perfected over the years. One afternoon, she came over for coffee and found me crying at the kitchen table, staring at a bank statement that showed almost nothing in our joint checking account. "Rosa, what's wrong?" she asked, sitting down beside me and taking my hand. I told her everything. The financial changes, the way Victor controlled every penny, the way he made me feel stupid and worthless whenever I asked questions. Elena's face went hard. "That's financial abuse," she said firmly. "You know that, right? What he's doing is not normal. It's not okay." I shook my head, defensive despite everything. "He's just trying to manage our money better," I said weakly. "He's under a lot of stress at work." Elena squeezed my hand harder. "Stop making excuses for him," she said, her voice sharp with frustration. "This isn't about stress. This is about control. He's isolating you, making you dependent on him so you can't leave. Rosa, this is how it starts. Financial abuse, emotional abuse. It escalates. You need to protect yourself." But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to believe that my marriage, the thing I'd invested 30 years of my life in, was abusive. That word felt too big, too dramatic, too extreme. Abuse happened to other women, women in worse situations than mine. Victor had never hit me. He'd never screamed at me or called me terrible names. He was just distant, critical, controlling. But that didn't make him abusive, did it? Elena tried to help me anyway, offering to loan me money, suggesting I open my own bank account that Victor didn't know about, giving me the number for a lawyer who specialized in family law. But I refused. I was ashamed, embarrassed that my marriage had come to this, that I needed my sister to rescue me like I was some damsel in distress. I promised her I'd talk to Victor, that I'd work things out, that everything would be fine. She looked at me with such sadness in her eyes, and I knew she didn't believe me. "I'm here when you need me," she said as she left. "And Rosa, you will need me. Sooner or later, you're going to realize what's happening, and when you do, I'll be right here." I hugged her and thanked her and closed the door, then went back to pretending everything was normal. The children noticed too, though they didn't always say anything. Maria called one weekend from college, her voice tight with worry. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked. "You sounded really stressed the last time we talked." I forced a laugh, trying to sound light and carefree. "I'm fine, honey," I lied. "Just busy with work and keeping the house running. You know how it is." There was a long pause. "Mom, is Dad treating you okay?" she asked, and the question caught me so off guard that I almost told her the truth, almost admitted that no, things weren't okay, that I felt small and scared and trapped in my own life, but I couldn't burden her with that. She was 19 years old, trying to navigate college and figure out her own future. She didn't need to worry about her parents' marriage. "Of course he is," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Everything's fine, Maria. Don't worry about me." Carlos noticed more quietly. He was always the observant one, the child who watched and listened and absorbed everything even when he didn't speak. He came home for Christmas one year, and I could see him watching the way Victor and I interacted, or rather, the way we didn't interact. We moved around each other like strangers, polite but distant, never touching, never laughing, never looking each other in the eye. On Christmas morning, after the presents were opened and the chaos had settled, Carlos found me in the kitchen washing dishes. He picked up a towel and started drying, working in silence beside me for a few minutes. Then he said very quietly, "Mom, if you ever need anything, money, a place to stay, help with anything, you can come to me. You know that, right?" I looked at him, surprised, and saw the worry in his dark eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'm okay, really." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded and went back to drying dishes, and we didn't talk about it again. Sophia was the hardest to read. She was young, still in high school, still living at home and seeing the daily reality of our marriage. But she was also Daddy's girl, the one who'd always adored Victor, who'd seen him as this larger-than-life figure who could do no wrong. She didn't understand why I seemed sad all the time, why I cried in the bathroom when I thought no one was listening, why I flinched sometimes when Victor raised his voice. She started spending more time away from home, at friends' houses or with her boyfriend, avoiding the tension that hung over our house like a storm cloud. When I tried to talk to her, to connect with her the way we used to, she pulled away. "You're so depressing, Mom," she said once, her teenage cruelty cutting deep. "Why can't you just be happy?" I didn't have an answer for her. How could I explain that happiness wasn't a choice, that I couldn't just decide to be happy when everything in my life felt wrong? The whispers about the paralegals started about a year before the incident. A mutual friend, someone from Victor's firm, pulled me aside at a company picnic and asked if I knew about Victor's new associate. The way she said it with that meaningful emphasis made my stomach drop. "What about her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. The friend looked uncomfortable, like she regretted bringing it up. "I don't know if it's anything," she said carefully, "but they've been seen together a lot. At restaurants, at the hotel bar after work functions. I just thought... Well, I thought you should know." I thanked her and walked away, my legs shaking, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront Victor immediately, to demand answers, to know the truth. But another part of me, the part that had learned to keep the peace at any cost, whispered that maybe it was nothing. Maybe they were just colleagues. Maybe this friend was stirring up trouble. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way Victor smelled like perfume sometimes when he came home, a scent that wasn't mine. The way he guarded his phone, keeping it face down on the table, taking it with him even when he went to the bathroom. The late-night work calls he took in his car in the driveway, his voice too low for me to hear. The receipts I'd find in his pockets for restaurants I'd never been to, for bottles of wine that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. I felt sick, nauseated by the betrayal I was too afraid to confirm. I told myself I was being paranoid, that years of emotional neglect had made me suspicious and insecure. But deep down, I knew. I knew there was someone else. I confronted him one night after he came home late, smelling like alcohol and that unfamiliar perfume. "Victor, are you having an affair?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me with such contempt, such cold disdain that I almost wished I hadn't asked. "Jesus Christ, Rosa," he said, his voice dripping with disgust. "You really are pathetic, you know that? Making up problems because your life is so boring and empty. No, I'm not having an affair. I'm working. Some of us have actual careers and responsibilities." His words were meant to shame me into silence, and they worked. I apologized for accusing him, and the conversation ended. But I didn't believe him. I couldn't believe him. And from that moment on, I started to see our marriage for what it really was, a prison disguised as a partnership, and Victor was the warden who held all the keys. The months that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. I went through the motions of daily existence, teaching my classes, grocery shopping, cooking meals that Victor barely touched, doing laundry and cleaning the house and paying the bills with the limited money he allowed me. But inside, I was hollowing out, becoming less and less of myself with each passing day. I stopped calling my friends because I was too ashamed to admit how bad things had gotten. I stopped doing the things I enjoyed, reading, gardening, painting, because nothing brought me joy anymore. I felt like a ghost in my own life, present but not really there, watching everything from a distance without feeling connected to any of it. My health started to decline. I wasn't sleeping well, waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning with my heart pounding and my thoughts racing. I had headaches constantly, tension headaches that made my whole skull feel like it was in a vice. My stomach hurt all the time, a churning anxiety that made eating difficult, I lost weight, not in a healthy way, but in a way that made my clothes hang loose and my face look gaunt. People at work started asking if I was okay, and I'd smile and lie and say I was just tired, just busy, just dealing with the normal stress of life. But the truth was, I was falling apart. My body was trying to tell me what my mind refused to accept, that this situation was killing me, slowly but surely. And then came that Tuesday in late September. I remember the morning so clearly, the way the sunlight streamed through the classroom windows, the excited chatter of the second graders as they worked on their reading assignments, the smell of chalk and paper, and the apple I'd brought for my lunch. I was helping a little girl sound out a difficult word when the pain started. At first, it was just a tightness in my chest, like someone was pressing down on my ribs. I thought it was anxiety, the same anxiety I'd been living with for months. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the tightness didn't ease. It got worse, spreading across my chest like a band of iron, squeezing tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe properly. The little girl looked up at me with wide eyes. "Miss Rosa, are you okay?" she asked, her voice thin with worry. I tried to smile, tried to reassure her, but my vision was starting to blur at the edges. The pain was radiating down my left arm now, a sharp stabbing sensation that made me gasp. I stood up from the small chair I'd been sitting in, thinking maybe I just needed to move, to walk it off, but my legs buckled beneath me. I felt myself falling, felt the hard floor rushing up to meet me, and then everything went dark for a moment. When I came to, Jessica was kneeling beside me, her face pale with fear. She was on her phone, and I could hear her saying my name, giving my information to someone on the other end of the line. "Yes, she collapsed," Jessica was saying, her voice high and frantic. "She's conscious now, but she's in a lot of pain. Please hurry." The children were gathered around, their small faces frightened, and I wanted to tell them I was okay, that they didn't need to be scared, but I couldn't speak. The pain was so intense, so all-consuming, that it took everything I had just to keep breathing. Jessica must have called Victor too, because he arrived within minutes, bursting through the classroom door like some kind of action hero. "Rosa!" he called out, rushing to my side. "Baby, I'm here. I've got you." He sounded so concerned, so loving, and for a split second, I felt a rush of relief. Maybe I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe he did still care. Maybe this crisis would bring us back together, remind us of what we meant to each other. He helped me to my feet, his arm strong and steady around my waist, and I leaned into him, grateful for his support. "The ambulance is on its way," Jessica said, her phone still in her hand. But Victor shook his head firmly. "That's going to take too long," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I'll get her there faster. Come on, Rosa, my car's right outside." Jessica looked uncertain, glancing between us. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Maybe we should wait for the paramedics." But Victor was already guiding me toward the door. "I've got this," he said confidently. "Trust me. I'll have her at the hospital in 10 minutes. Jessica nodded, stepping aside, and I remember seeing the relief on her face. She was young, only in her second year of teaching, and she was probably grateful that someone else was taking charge. Victor practically carried me to the parking lot, opening the passenger door of his BMW and helping me inside. I slumped against the seat, my chest still tight, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He closed the door and hurried around to the driver's side, starting the engine and pulling out of the parking lot with the kind of urgency that should have comforted me. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, not yet, but there was something in the set of his jaw, something in the way he wouldn't look at me, that made a small alarm bell ring in the back of my mind. We merged onto the highway and I reached for my phone thinking I should call Elena. She'd want to know what was happening. She'd meet us at the hospital, hold my hand, make sure the doctors were taking care of me. But before I could even unlock the screen, Victor reached over and plucked the phone from my hand. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice weak. "Victor, I need to call my sister." He glanced at me briefly, his expression unreadable, then pressed the power button on my phone and set it in the center console. "You don't need to call anyone right now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You need to stay calm and focus on breathing. I'll handle everything." There was something in his voice, something cold and detached, that sent a chill down my spine despite the pain. "Victor, please," I tried again, reaching for the phone, but he moved it out of my reach, his hand firm and unyielding. "Rosa, stop," he said sharply. "You're being hysterical. Just sit back and let me drive." Hysterical. That word again, the word he always used to dismiss my feelings, to make me seem irrational and over-emotional. But this time, it didn't work. This time, through the fog of pain and fear, I was starting to see clearly. Something was very wrong. I looked out the window, trying to orient myself, and realized we'd passed the exit for the nearest hospital. "Victor, you missed the turn," I said, panic creeping into my voice. "The hospital is back that way." He didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, and we kept driving, away from the hospital, away from help, away from safety. "Victor," I said more forcefully, ignoring the pain that shot through my chest, "where are we going? The hospital is—" And that's when he said it. That's when he turned his head, looked me directly in the eye with an expression so cold it made my blood freeze, and said those 5 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my safety. "No one is coming for you." I made sure of that. For a moment, I couldn't process what he'd said. The words didn't make sense. They didn't fit with the reality I understood. The reality where I was having a medical emergency and my husband was rushing me to the hospital to save my life. But as I stared at his face, at the hardness in his eyes and the tight line of his mouth, understanding crashed over me like a wave of ice water. He wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to kill me. This wasn't an act of love or desperation or poor judgment. This was premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded murder, and he thought he'd gotten away with it. My mind started racing, even as my body screamed with pain. What did he mean? He'd made sure no one was coming for me? Had he done something to my phone beyond just turning it off? Had he called people, told them not to worry, that he had everything under control? Did Jessica think I was safely on my way to medical care when in reality I was being driven to my death? The thoughts came fast and chaotic, tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to understand, to find a way out, to survive. Because that's what this was now, a matter of survival. Not just surviving a heart attack or whatever was happening to my body, but surviving my own husband. "Victor, what are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even though I was shaking all over. "What do you mean?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, come on, Rosa, don't play stupid. Though I guess that's not much of a stretch for you, is it?" His words were designed to hurt, to demean, but I forced myself to ignore them. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to buy time, needed to figure out how to get out of this car and away from this man who was supposed to love me, but had instead become my greatest threat. "You've been in my way for too long," he continued, his voice conversational, almost casual, like he was discussing the weather or what to have for dinner. "I've worked too hard to let you drag me down now. Do you have any idea how much it would cost me to divorce you? How much you'd be entitled to after 30 years of marriage? Half of everything, Rosa. Half of the house, half of my pension, half of my savings. And for what? For being a mediocre wife who contributed nothing of real value?" Each word was a knife, cutting deeper and deeper, but I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not when my life depended on staying alert and focused. "So what's your plan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're just going to let me die?" He shrugged, his eyes back on the road. "You're having a heart attack, Rosa, or at least that's what everyone will think. A tragic, sudden medical emergency. I did everything I could, rushed you out of that school, drove like a maniac trying to get you help, but it was just too late. These things happen, especially to women your age who don't take care of themselves." The casual cruelty of it, the way he'd already planned out the narrative, the lies he'd tell, the sympathy he'd collect, it made me want to vomit. "What about the kids?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "What about Maria and Carlos and Sofia? You think they won't figure it out?" For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not guilt or remorse, but irritation, like I'd pointed out an inconvenient detail he'd hoped to avoid. "They'll believe what I tell them," he said firmly. "They'll grieve, they'll move on, and eventually they'll understand that their father did everything he could. And in a few years, when enough time has passed, they'll accept that I've found someone new, someone who actually appreciates what I've built. Someone new. The paralegal. Of course. This wasn't just about avoiding a divorce settlement. This was about clearing the path for his new life, his do-over, his chance to start fresh without the burden of an aging wife who knew all his secrets and failures. The car kept moving, heading deeper into unfamiliar territory. I'd lived in this area for decades, but I didn't recognize where we were. Trees lined both sides of the road, dense and dark, and there were no other cars, no houses, no signs of civilization. He'd planned this route carefully, chosen a place where we wouldn't be seen, where he could dispose of me and drive away without witnesses. The realization made my chest tighten even more, made the pain intensify until I thought I might actually die right there in the passenger seat, which would probably make things easier for him. But I refused to make things easy for Victor. I refused to lie down and die just because he decided I was inconvenient. I thought about my children, about Maria and Carlos and Sofia, about the grandchildren I'd never meet if I didn't survive this. I thought about Elena, about all the times she'd warned me, all the times she'd seen what I refused to see. I thought about all the women who'd been in situations like this, who'd trusted the wrong person and paid with their lives. And I thought about myself, about Rosa Delgado, about the girl I'd been before I met Victor, the one who'd had dreams and ambitions and a sense of her own worth. She deserved better than this. She deserved to live. Victor slowed the car and turned onto a dirt road, barely more than a path through the trees. The branches scraped against the windows, and the car bounced over ruts and rocks. My heart was hammering now, not just from the medical crisis, but from pure terror. This was it. This was where he planned to leave me, probably claiming he'd stopped so I could get some air, that I'd collapsed and died before he could get help. The story would be believable enough. People would shake their heads and say how tragic it was, how hard he'd tried, how devastated he must be. And meanwhile, I'd be dead in the woods. Another statistic, another woman who didn't see it coming. But then I remembered something. Victor's phone. It was sitting in the cup holder between us, the screen occasionally lighting up with notifications. And I knew his password. Our wedding anniversary. 6 digits he'd used for everything because he thought it made him seem romantic and sentimental. He'd never changed it because he'd never imagined I'd need to use it. Never imagined I'd be desperate enough to steal his phone and use it against him. It was a small thing, a tiny advantage, but it might be enough. I waited, forcing myself to stay still, to appear weak and defeated. I let my eyes drift closed as if I were losing consciousness, and I heard Victor's breath quicken, probably with anticipation. He thought he was winning. He thought I'd given up. Good. Let him think that. Let him get comfortable. Let his guard down. The car slowed even more, coming to a stop in a small clearing surrounded by trees. I could hear birds singing, oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath them, and the sound was so normal, so peaceful, that it felt surreal. "Rosa," Victor said, and there was something almost gentle in his voice, like he was trying to comfort a dying animal. "Just let go. It'll be over soon." He reached over to check my pulse, his fingers cold against my wrist, and that's when I made my move. My hand shot out and grabbed his phone from the cup holder. His eyes widened in surprise, and he lunged for it, but I was faster. I threw open the passenger door and half fell, half jumped out of the car, my legs weak and unsteady beneath me. "Rosa!" he shouted, and I heard his door slam as he came after me. I ran. I don't know how I ran given the pain in my chest and the weakness in my limbs, but adrenaline is a powerful thing. It overrides pain, overrides fear, overrides every logical thought that says you can't do this, you're not strong enough, you're going to die. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and scratching my face, and I clutched Victor's phone like it was a lifeline. Behind me, I could hear him shouting, hear him crashing through the trees, and I knew he was faster than me, stronger than me, that he'd catch me if I didn't find help soon. But then I saw it. A break in the trees, a glimpse of light that meant civilization, that meant people, that meant safety. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the fire in my chest, ignoring the way my vision was starting to tunnel and darken at the edges. Just a little further, just a little more. I burst out of the tree line into a small clearing, and there, like something out of a dream, was a house. A small, modest house with a porch light on and a pickup truck in the driveway. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just ran straight for that door and pounded on it with both fists, gasping and crying and screaming for help. The door opened, and an elderly man stood there, his eyes wide with alarm. He was in his 70s, maybe, with white hair and kind eyes that went from confused to horrified as he took in my appearance. My face scratched and bleeding, my clothes torn, my chest heaving as I struggled to breathe. "Please," I gasped, holding up Victor's phone like evidence. "Please help me. My husband. He's trying to kill me. Please." The man didn't ask questions. He grabbed my arm and pulled me inside, slamming the door and locking it behind me. "Sit down," he ordered, guiding me to a worn couch. "I'm calling the police." Through the window, I could see Victor emerge from the trees. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his face twisted with rage and frustration, staring at the house. For a moment, I thought he might try to come inside, might try to finish what he'd started, but then he seemed to realize the situation had changed. He'd lost the element of surprise. There was a witness now, someone who'd seen me running from him, someone who could corroborate my story. His expression shifted, became calculating, and I knew he was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make himself look innocent. But it was too late. The old man was already on the phone with 911, already giving our location, already telling them to send police and an ambulance. Victor stared at the house for a long moment, and even from this distance, I could see the cold fury in his eyes. Then he turned and walked back toward his car. I heard the engine start, heard the sound of tires on gravel, and I knew he was leaving, driving away, probably already planning his defense, his story, his version of events that would make him the victim and me the hysterical, unstable wife. But I had his phone. I had evidence, and I had survived. The paramedics arrived first, followed closely by 2 police cars. The EMTs checked my vitals and determined I was having an acute cardiac event, though not a full heart attack. The stress, the fear, the physical exertion, it had all triggered a crisis that could have killed me if it had gone on much longer. They stabilized me, gave me medication, and loaded me into the ambulance. One of the police officers rode with me, taking my statement as we drove to the hospital. I told him everything, the financial abuse, the affair, the way Victor had taken my phone and driven me away from help, the things he'd said, the clearing in the woods where I was sure he'd planned to leave me to die. The officer listened carefully, taking notes, his expression growing more serious with every detail. "Ma'am, we're going to need to examine your husband's phone," he said when I finished. "Everything on there could be evidence." I handed it over willingly, relief flooding through me. "Let them look. Let them see the text messages with his mistress, the searches in his browser history, the evidence of his planning and his intention. Let the truth come out, finally, after so many years of lies and manipulation and control." At the hospital, they admitted me for observation. My heart was damaged, not irreparably, but significantly, the cardiologist explained. The stress I'd been under for years had weakened it, and this acute crisis had pushed it to the breaking point. I'd need medication, lifestyle changes, regular monitoring, but I'd live. I'd survived. and that was more than Victor had wanted for me. The police came back the next morning with more questions, and this time they had a detective with them, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Morrison who specialized in domestic violence cases. "Mrs. Delgado," she said, sitting beside my hospital bed with a folder full of documents, "we've examined your husband's phone, and I have to tell you, the evidence we found is damning." She opened the folder and showed me printouts of text messages between Victor and the paralegal, a woman named Brittany Chen who was 15 years younger than me and apparently convinced that Victor was going to leave me and marry her. The messages were explicit, not just sexually, but in their discussion of me. The wife, they called me, like I was an obstacle, a problem to be solved. "Once she's gone, we can finally be together," Victor had written. "I'm working on it. Trust me." There were other messages too, conversations with friends where Victor had joked about me dying, about how much easier his life would be if I just had an accident. Detective Morrison also showed me his search history from the weeks leading up to the incident. How long does it take to die from a heart attack without treatment? Remote locations near our town. Can you be charged if someone dies from lack of medical care? Life insurance payout timeline? It was all there. Every piece of his plan laid out in searches and messages and notes. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, waiting for the right opportunity. "There's more," Detective Morrison said, flipping to another page. "We found financial records showing that your husband transferred significant assets into accounts under his and Ms. Chen's names over the past 2 years. He also changed the beneficiary on your life insurance policies. You had 2, one through your work and one he took out on you privately. Both now list him as the sole beneficiary. If you died, Mrs. Delgado, he would have received over $500,000. The number made me dizzy. $500,000. That's what my life was worth to him. That's what he'd been willing to kill for. Victor was arrested later that day. The police found him at his office, calmly working as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't left his wife to die in the woods just hours earlier. He went willingly, probably still confident that he could talk his way out of it, that his charm and his education and his position in the community would protect him. But this time, they didn't. The evidence was too strong, the case too clear. He was charged with attempted murder, financial fraud, and several other counts I didn't fully understand. His bail was set high, $200,000, and he couldn't make it. So he sat in jail, waiting for trial, probably still convinced that somehow, some way, he'd find a loophole, a way out. The news spread quickly. It was a small town, and a prominent lawyer being arrested for trying to murder his wife was big news. My phone, once I got it back and turned it on, was flooded with messages. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, shocked and concerned. Neighbors called, offering help and support. My children flew home immediately, all 3 of them, and they gathered around my hospital bed with tears streaming down their faces. Maria held one hand, Carlos held the other, and Sophia sat at the foot of the bed, her face pale and stunned. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" Maria asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you say something? We could have helped you." I squeezed her hand gently. "I didn't know how bad it was," I admitted, "and I didn't want to burden you. I thought I could handle it, thought things would get better. I was wrong." Carlos's jaw was tight with anger. "I should have seen it," he said. "I should have done something. I knew something was off, but I didn't push, didn't ask the right questions." I looked at each of them, at these beautiful children I'd raised, and I felt a wave of love so powerful it almost hurt. "This is not your fault," I said firmly. "None of this is your fault. Your father made his choices. He's responsible for what he did, not you." Sophia was the quietest, the most withdrawn. She'd idolized her father, and having that image shattered was devastating for her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How could he do this? How could he try to kill you?" I didn't have an easy answer for her. How do you explain to your child that the person they loved and trusted is capable of such cruelty. Sometimes people aren't who we think they are, I said softly. Sometimes they hide parts of themselves, the dark parts, until something brings them to light. Your father has problems, Sophia. Problems that have nothing to do with you or me or anything we did or didn't do. He made choices based on selfishness and greed, and now he has to face the consequences. Elena arrived that afternoon, bursting into my hospital room like a tornado of righteous fury. I knew it, she said, pacing back and forth at the foot of my bed. I knew that man was dangerous. I told you, Rosa. I told you years ago. But there was no satisfaction in her voice. No, I told you so. Just anger and relief and a fierce protectiveness that made me start crying all over again. She climbed onto the bed beside me, careful of all the wires and tubes, and held me while I sobbed. You're safe now, she murmured. You're safe, and I'm not letting you out of my sight. You're coming to stay with me as soon as they discharge you, and we're going to figure this out together. The days in the hospital blurred together. Doctors and nurses came and went, adjusting my medication, monitoring my heart, asking questions about my symptoms and my stress levels. Detective Morrison visited twice more, updating me on the investigation and preparing me for the legal battle ahead. Victor's lawyer had reached out, she told me, trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney wasn't interested. The evidence was too strong, the crime too serious. This was going to trial, and I was going to have to testify, to sit in a courtroom and recount the worst day of my life in front of strangers and a jury and Victor himself. The thought terrified me, but Detective Morrison was reassuring. You're stronger than you think, Mrs. Delgado, she said. You survived. You fought back. You saved your own life, and now you're going to help us make sure he can never do this to anyone else. I nodded, trying to absorb her confidence, to believe in myself the way she seemed to believe in me. I'd spent so many years doubting myself, letting Victor's words and actions erode my self-esteem until I felt like nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I was a survivor, and I was going to make sure the world knew exactly what Victor Delgado had done. I was discharged from the hospital after 3 days. Elena drove me to her house, a cozy bungalow on the other side of town, and set me up in her guest room. She'd prepared it carefully, putting fresh flowers on the nightstand and stocking the drawers with comfortable clothes in my size. You're staying here as long as you need, she said firmly. No arguments. You need time to heal, and you need someone watching over you. I was too exhausted and too grateful to argue. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I felt protected. I felt like I mattered. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments, meetings with lawyers, and conversations with the kids. I filed for divorce, which felt both necessary and surreal. How do you divorce someone who tried to kill you? How do you untangle 3 decades of shared life from someone who'd betrayed you so completely? But my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, whom Elena had recommended, assured me it was straightforward under the circumstances. Given the criminal charges and the evidence of financial fraud, you'll get everything, she said. The house, the savings, his pension, all of it. He forfeited any claim to marital assets the moment he committed a crime against you. It felt strange, thinking about money and property when I was still processing the trauma of what had happened, but Patricia explained that it was important, that financial security was part of rebuilding my life. He spent years controlling you through money, she said. Now we're going to make sure you have the resources to be independent, to never rely on anyone else again. So I signed the papers, answered the questions, and tried to focus on the practical steps of moving forward. The criminal trial was set for 6 months later. In the meantime, Victor remained in jail, unable to make bail. I heard through the legal grapevine that he was shocked by this, convinced that his colleagues and friends would pool money to help him, but no one did. The evidence against him was too damning, the crime too disturbing. Even his own law firm distanced themselves, releasing a statement saying they were shocked and appalled by the charges and that Victor had been terminated effective immediately. Brittany Chen, the paralegal, was also fired and charged with her role in the financial fraud. She tried to claim she didn't know what Victor was planning, that she thought he was just going through a divorce, but the text messages told a different story. I started therapy again, this time with a specialist in trauma and PTSD. Dr. Yub Patel was in her 50s, soft-spoken but direct, and she didn't let me hide from the difficult truths. What you experienced was an attempted murder by someone you trusted completely, she said in our first session. That's a profound betrayal, Rosa. It's going to take time to process, to heal, to learn to trust again, but you will heal. You're already healing. We met twice a week, and slowly, painfully, I started to unpack the years of abuse I'd endured without recognizing it for what it was. The financial control, the emotional manipulation, the isolation, the criticism, all of it had been abuse, systematic and deliberate. I also joined a support group for survivors of domestic violence. The first meeting was terrifying. I sat in a circle with 8 other women, all of us carrying our own stories of pain and survival. And when it was my turn to speak, I almost couldn't do it. But then I looked around at their faces, saw the understanding and compassion there, and the words came. I told them about Victor, about the years of feeling small and trapped, about the day he tried to kill me. And when I finished, they didn't judge me or question my choices. They just nodded and shared their own stories, and I realized I wasn't alone. I'd never been alone. There were so many of us, so many women who'd been through similar things, and we were all still here, still standing, still fighting. The trial began on a cold morning in March. I dressed carefully that day, choosing a simple navy dress and low heels, wanting to look composed and credible. Elena came with me, holding my hand as we walked into the courthouse, and my children sat in the gallery behind the prosecution's table. Victor was already there, sitting with his lawyer, and when I walked in, he looked up. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw something in his expression. Not remorse or shame, but calculation. He was still trying to figure out how to win, how to manipulate the situation in his favor. But this time, it wouldn't work. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They presented the text messages, the search history, the financial records. They called Jessica from my school, who testified about how quickly Victor had arrived, how insistent he'd been about not waiting for an ambulance. They called the elderly man who'd let me into his house, who described my terror and desperation, and the way Victor had stood at the edge of the clearing, clearly debating what to do next. They called the paramedics and the police officers and Detective Morrison, each one adding another piece to the overwhelming evidence of Victor's guilt. And then they called me. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking through water, everything slow and surreal. I was sworn in, and the prosecutor, a stern man named Mr. Harrison, began asking questions. Mrs. Delgado, can you tell us what happened on September 24th of last year? I took a deep breath and began. I told them about collapsing at work, about Victor arriving and refusing to wait for the ambulance. I told them about the drive, about how he'd taken my phone and silenced it, about the words he'd said that had made my blood turn cold. I told them about the clearing in the woods, about running for my life, about the terror and the pain and the certainty that I was going to die. Victor's lawyer tried to poke holes in my testimony during cross-examination, suggesting I'd misunderstood, that I'd been confused and in pain and not thinking clearly. But I didn't waver. I know what he said, I replied firmly. I know what he meant. He told me no one was coming for me, that he'd made sure of that. He drove me away from the hospital, away from help. He was going to let me die. The lawyer pressed harder, but I wouldn't back down. I'd spent too many years letting Victor make me doubt myself, question my own perceptions. Not anymore. I knew the truth, and I was going to make sure everyone else knew it too. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Guilty of attempted murder. Guilty of financial fraud. Guilty of coercive control. I sat in the courtroom and felt something break open inside me. Some knot of fear and tension that had been there for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. It was over. He'd been held accountable. Justice, imperfect and incomplete as it was, had been served. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, I was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium, looking directly at Victor, and I spoke from my heart. "You took 31 years of my life," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "You made me feel small and worthless and trapped. You isolated me from the people who loved me, controlled every aspect of my life, and when I was no longer useful to you, you tried to kill me. You nearly succeeded. But I survived, Victor. I survived, and I'm standing here today to make sure everyone knows what you did and who you really are." Victor stared at me, his face blank, and I wondered if he felt anything at all. Remorse? Shame? Regret? But I didn't think so. I think he only felt sorry for himself, sorry that he'd been caught. The judge sentenced him to 14 years in prison, to be served consecutively with additional time for the fraud charges, 16 years total. He'd be 73 years old when he got out, if he lived that long. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time, and I held his gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that I wasn't the same woman he'd tried to kill. I was stronger now, harder, more certain of my own worth, and he would spend the next 16 years thinking about what he'd lost and what he'd destroyed. The divorce was finalized a month later. I got the house, the savings, half his pension, and restitution for the money he'd stolen. It wasn't about revenge or greed. It was about reclaiming what was mine, what I'd earned through 3 decades of partnership. I sold the house almost immediately. I couldn't live there anymore, couldn't walk through those rooms without seeing ghosts of the woman I'd been, the woman who'd been slowly crushed under the weight of Victor's cruelty. Instead, I bought a smaller place, a cottage near Elena, with a big backyard and lots of windows. I painted every room in colors I loved, soft blues and warm yellows, and that lavender I'd always wanted in the bedroom. I filled the house with things that made me happy, books and plants and artwork from local artists. I got a dog, a sweet golden retriever named Sunny, who followed me everywhere and slept at the foot of my bed. I planted a garden in the backyard, vegetables and flowers and herbs, and I spent hours out there in the warm months, my hands in the dirt, feeling connected to something real and growing and good. I started taking walks every morning, building my strength back up, taking care of the heart that had been so damaged by stress and fear. And slowly, day by day, I started to feel like myself again. Not the self I'd been before Victor, but a new self, stronger and wiser and more resilient. My relationship with my children deepened. Maria and I talked on the phone almost every day, sharing the small details of our lives, the things I'd been too afraid to share before. Carlos visited often, bringing his wife and kids, and we'd spend weekends together cooking and playing games and just being a family, without the shadow of Victor's presence hanging over us. Sophia took the longest to heal, struggling with anger and confusion, but eventually she came around. We had a long conversation one night on my porch, just the two of us, and she cried and told me how guilty she felt for not seeing what was happening, for being angry at me instead of him. I held her and told her it wasn't her fault, that none of this was her fault, and that I loved her unconditionally. "I know, Mom," she whispered. "I love you too." I also reconnected with old friends, women I'd lost touch with over the years because Victor had monopolized my time or made me feel like I wasn't interesting enough, wasn't good enough to maintain those friendships. We met for coffee and lunch and long walks, and I rediscovered the joy of female friendship, of laughing and sharing and supporting each other through life's ups and downs. They'd known something was wrong, they told me, but they hadn't known how to help, hadn't wanted to overstep or interfere. "I wish I'd said something," one friend admitted. "I wish I'd been braver." I told her the same thing I told my children. It wasn't her fault. The only person responsible for what happened was Victor. I went back to work after a few months, returning to my job as a teacher's aide at a different school. The administration had been understanding about my situation, giving me time to heal and recover, and when I was ready, they welcomed me back with open arms. Being around the children again, seeing their bright faces and boundless energy, reminded me why I'd chosen this profession in the first place. They were hope and possibility and joy, everything that Victor had tried to steal from me, and helping them learn and grow felt like my own form of healing, my way of investing in a future that looked nothing like my past. I also started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women navigate the complex process of leaving abusive relationships. I answered phones on a crisis hotline, sat with women as they made safety plans, and shared my own story when it felt appropriate. Some of them were shocked that someone like me, educated, middle class, with grown children and a stable life, had ended up in an abusive marriage. But that was the point. Abuse doesn't discriminate. It doesn't only happen to poor women or uneducated women or women without resources. It can happen to anyone. And it often does. And the more we talk about it, the more we share our stories, the less power abusers have over us. I received a letter from Victor about a year after his sentencing. It was forwarded through his lawyer, and for days I stared at the envelope, debating whether to open it. Part of me wanted to know what he had to say, whether he'd finally taken responsibility, whether he'd shown even a glimmer of genuine remorse. But another part of me knew it didn't matter. Nothing he could say would change what he'd done or undo the damage he'd caused. Still, curiosity got the better of me. And one night I sat at my kitchen table and opened the letter. It was shorter than I expected, written in his precise handwriting on prison stationery. He said he'd had time to think about what he'd done, that he understood now how wrong it was, that he was attending therapy and anger management classes and trying to become a better person. He said he hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive him, that he knew he didn't deserve it, but he was asking anyway. And then, in the last paragraph, he said something that made my blood boil. I never meant for things to go that far. I was under so much pressure, Rosa, and I made a mistake. I hope you can understand. A mistake. That's what he called premeditated attempted murder. A mistake. Like he'd forgotten to pick up milk at the store or left the oven on. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and threw it in the trash. I didn't respond. I didn't owe him my forgiveness, my understanding, or my time. He'd made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. And maybe one day I'd be able to forgive him, not for his sake, but for mine, because carrying anger and resentment is exhausting, and I wanted to be free of it. But that day wasn't today, and it might never come, and that was okay. 2 years after the trial, I was sitting in my backyard on a warm summer evening, watching the fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Sonny was beside me, his head resting on my lap, and I could hear the distant sound of children laughing in a neighbor's yard. The roses I'd planted were in full bloom, their perfume filling the air, and the tomatoes on the vine were almost ready to pick. It was such a simple moment, such an ordinary evening, and yet it felt profound. This was peace. This was freedom. This was a life worth living. I thought about that day on the highway, the moment when Victor had said those terrible words, and I'd realized my life was in danger. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything, not just my life, but my sense of self, my dignity, my future. And I thought about how I'd survived, how I'd fought back, how I'd reclaimed my life piece by piece. It hadn't been easy. There were still days when I struggled with trust, days when I woke up from nightmares where I was back in that car, trapped and terrified. But those days were becoming fewer and farther between. The nightmares were fading. The fear was losing its grip. I've learned so much over these past few years. I've learned that strength isn't about never being broken. It's about putting yourself back together when you are. I've learned that you can't make someone love you the way you deserve to be loved, and you shouldn't have to. I've learned that being alone doesn't mean being lonely, that you can be whole and complete all by yourself without needing someone else to validate your existence. I've learned that forgiveness is complicated, that it's okay to forgive yourself while still holding others accountable for their actions. And I've learned that survival is just the first step. What comes after? Rebuilding, healing, thriving. That's the real work, and it's work worth doing. If you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, if you recognize the patterns of control and manipulation and slow erosion of self-worth, please know that it's not your fault. You're not weak or stupid or broken. You're human, and you trusted someone who didn't deserve your trust. But you can get out. You can rebuild. It won't be easy, and there will be days when you doubt yourself and wonder if you made the right choice. But I promise you, on the other side of that fear is a life worth living. A life where you get to be yourself, fully and unapologetically. A life where you don't have to walk on eggshells or wonder what mood they'll be in or how you can make yourself more acceptable. A life where you matter. And if you're someone who's never experienced this kind of betrayal, who's been fortunate enough to have healthy, loving relationships, I ask you to be kind to those of us who haven't. Don't judge us for staying too long or not seeing the signs or making choices that seem obvious in hindsight. Support us. Believe us. Help us find the resources and courage we need to get out. Because leaving an abusive relationship is one of the hardest things a person can do, and we need all the help we can get. We need people who will listen without judgment, who will stand with us when we're ready to leave, who will remind us of our worth when we've forgotten it ourselves. I still drive past that forest sometimes, the stretch of road where Victor turned off the highway and drove me toward what he thought would be my death. I don't avoid it. I don't let it haunt me. Instead, I think of it as the place where I was reborn, where the old Rosa died and the new Rosa emerged. The woman who ran through those trees wasn't the same woman who got into that car. She was someone stronger, someone braver, someone who refused to let cruelty and selfishness win. And every time I pass that road, I remember her. I honor her, and I'm grateful that she fought so hard to give me this life. I'm 55 years old now, and I have no idea what the next chapter of my life will look like. Maybe I'll keep teaching and volunteering and tending my garden. Maybe I'll travel, see the places I've always wanted to see, but never had the freedom or confidence to visit. Maybe I'll write a book, share my story in a more permanent way so other women can read it and feel less alone. Maybe I'll fall in love again, though that feels impossible right now, the idea of trusting someone that completely after what Victor did. Or maybe I'll just keep living quietly day by day, savoring the small joys and refusing to let fear or bitterness steal my peace. Whatever I do, it will be my choice. And that's the greatest gift I could have given myself, the freedom to choose, to make decisions based on what I want and need and value, not based on what someone else expects or demands or allows. I am the author of my own story now, and I'm writing a narrative of resilience and hope and second chances. It's not the story I thought I'd be telling when I walked down that aisle 31 years ago, young and hopeful and convinced that love was enough. But it's a good story. It's a true story. It's my story, and I'm proud of it. So here's what I want you to take away from everything I've shared. Life is unpredictable, and people are complicated, and sometimes the person you love most in the world is the person who's capable of hurting you the most. But that doesn't mean you're helpless. You have more strength than you realize, more resilience, more options. You just have to be willing to believe in yourself enough to use them. Don't wait for someone else to save you. Don't hope that things will magically get better if you just endure a little longer. Save yourself. Fight for yourself. Because you are worth fighting for. You are valuable and worthy and enough, exactly as you are. And you deserve a life filled with love and respect and safety. Don't settle for anything less. And remember, no one has the right to take your life, your dignity, or your future. Not your spouse, not your family, not anyone. You are entitled to live without fear, without control, without the constant erosion of your spirit. You are entitled to peace. And if you're not experiencing that peace right now, if you're living in a situation that makes you feel small or scared or trapped, please reach out. Talk to someone you trust. Call a hotline. Make a safety plan. Take the first step, even if it's terrifying, because that first step is the beginning of your journey back to yourself. I sit here now in my little cottage with my dog at my feet and my garden growing outside and my children loving me from near and far. And I feel something I haven't felt in years: contentment. Not happiness exactly, because happiness is fleeting and dependent on circumstances, but contentment, that deep sense of being okay, of being exactly where I'm supposed to be, of having weathered the storm and come out the other side. It's a quiet feeling, not dramatic or overwhelming, but steady and real and mine. And when I think about Victor now, locked away in his prison cell, I don't feel hatred or rage or even much anger anymore. I feel pity. I pity him for being so consumed by greed and selfishness that he was willing to destroy everything real and good in his life. I pity him for being incapable of genuine love or connection, for seeing people as objects to be used and discarded when they no longer served his purposes. I pity him for the years he'll spend alone, thinking about what he lost and what he could have had if he'd just been a better person. And then I let it go. I release him from my thoughts and my heart, and I return to my life, my real life, the one I'm building with intention and care and hope. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for bearing witness to my pain and my survival and my journey back to myself. I hope it helps you in some way, whether you're going through something similar or you're trying to understand someone who is. And I hope it reminds you that no matter how dark things seem, no matter how hopeless or trapped you feel, there's always a way forward. You just have to be willing to take that first step, and then the next step, and the next. One step at a time, one day at a time, until you wake up one morning and realize you've built something beautiful out of the broken pieces. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your support means more to me than you know. Hearing from other survivors, from people who understand what it's like to fight your way back from betrayal and trauma, reminds me that I'm not alone, that we're not alone. We're a community of survivors, and together we're stronger than anything that tried to break us. And if you want to hear more real-life stories about resilience, family drama, and finding strength in the darkest moments, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. I'll be here, sharing more stories from my life and from other survivors who've been brave enough to speak their truth. Because the more we talk about these issues, the more we share our experiences, the less power abusers have over us. We take back our narratives. We refuse to be silenced. We insist on being heard. Until next time, please take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Remember that you're stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and more valuable than you've been led to believe. You deserve good things. You deserve peace and safety and love. You deserve a life that reflects your worth. And if you're not there yet, if you're still fighting to get free, know that I'm rooting for you. We're all rooting for you. You can do this. You will do this. And when you come out the other side, you'll be amazed at how strong you really are. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to read my story all the way to the end. May you find peace. May you find strength. And may you always remember that you are enough. Exactly as you are. You are enough.